Come, whoever you are. You are welcome here. No matter your age, your size, the color of your eyes, or your hair, or your skin, you are welcome here. No matter whom you love, or how you speak, or whatever your abilities, you are welcome here. Whether you come with laughter in your heart or tears in your eyes, you are welcome here. If you come with an open mind, a loving heart, and willing hands, then you are indeed welcome here. Good morning, and thanks for joining us. Welcome to the First Unitarian Universalist Church of New Orleans, a congregation that has been gathered in love since 1833 to seek wholeness and work for justice in the world. I am Henry Jermaine McCarthy, and my pronouns are he, him, and we. If you are a visitor, we invite you to raise your hand so that we can greet you. Also, we would like to ensure that everyone in attendance can hear the service in its entirety. If you are unable to hear any of the speakers, please speak up or wave your hand, and we will do our best to speak up or adjust the microphones. We are a lay-led congregation. On Sunday mornings, we invite a variety of folks, including UU ministers, other religious professionals, leaders from social justice organizations, and our own members to be voices of hope, courage, and spiritual or intellectual transformation from our pulpit. Our worship leader today is church member and board treasurer Justin Wolfe. Yay. Justin uses he, him pronouns. Let us read together the chalice lighting, which is number 447 in the gray hymnal. And afterwards, we will sing the chalice lighting response, which is "Rekindle this light in celebration of the life we share." So, number 447, the words of Albert Schweitzer. At times, our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lighted the flame within us. Please remain as you are and sing our opening hymn, which is number 170 in the gray hymnal, "We Are a Gentle, Angry People." And now Margot Anderson will give us our Black History moment for today.
Thank you, Henry. So all month in celebration of Black History, we're highlighting one African American Unitarian Universalist that inspires us. And any children who are interested, there's a little color page, and there'll be one each week for whoever the person is who's being talked about. But the Unitarian Universalist that I chose to highlight today is one of my favorite musicians. So this is Isaiah Barnwell. She was born in New York City in 1946. Her mother was a nurse, and her father was a violinist and a violin teacher, and that's how she got her name. Eugene Isaiah is a famous Belgian violinist, and she studied violin from age 2.5. Can you imagine how tiny that violin was? Up to age 17, and then she disappointed her father and went off to study speech pathology. So here is Isai. She has a bachelor's and PhD in speech pathology and also a master's in public health. And she was living in the DC area and attending All Souls Unitarian Church and singing in the choir. And she noticed that there were some really good singers who weren't singing in the choir, and she asked them why, and they said, well, we don't really read music, and it's a very fancy reading music choir. And she said, well, you know, I have some music background. I'm going to start our own choir. It's called the Jubilee Singers. They sang a lot of gospel music. And one Sunday, Bernice Johnson Regan. Do people know who that is? She was one of the famous freedom singers and sadly died this past July. But she started, exactly, Sweet Honey in the Rock. And so she was at church, and they were looking for someone for their group who could sign. I forgot to mention, she was a professor at Howard University and Gallaudet University for the deaf. She was proficient in sign language. And there she was. They were doing a service on disability, and she was singing a solo, and she was signing all the words for the congregation, and they knew they needed her as their next new member. And so here she is in the early days of Sweet Honey in the Rock, and they are a very famous group. She sang with them for about 30 years, and she has written some of our favorite hymns. So she's in our hymnal, number 1001, Breaths, and number 10, I think 54, We Are, were written by Isaiah Barnwell. And she now tours the world, and she gives lectures about singing and the power of singing and the power of singing in protest and the background of African American music in particular and helping large groups all sing together. And so she's our spotlighted person for the week. And if you have a child who's not with you but who would like to color her picture is, there's a little color page in the back. Feel free to take one home. Thanks.
And now I'm going to read the Time for All Ages. I'm going to come down and sit here. So any young or young at heart who would like to come down, this book called The Undefeated is beautiful. It has amazing art. So you'll want to come down and see it if you like beautiful pictures. Okay.
I've been in this situation. I'm volunteering to help you.
Okay. Can you hear me? Can you hear me with this mic? Yeah? Okay. All right. So, I'm going to sit here, I guess.
Oh, you don't have the whole mic, are you? Now I'm just...
So, this book is The Undefeated by Kwame Alexander. It's a poem that Kwame wrote, and Kadir Nelson did the art. The Undefeated. This is for the unforgettable, the swift and sweet ones who hurdled history and opened a world of possible. the ones who survived America by any means necessary. And the ones who didn't. This is for the undeniable, the ones who scored with chains on one hand and faith in the other. This is for the unflappable, the sophisticated ones who box adversity and tackle vision. Who shine their light for the world to see and don't stop till the break of dawn. This is for the unafraid, the audacious ones who carried the red, white, and weary blues on the battlefield to save an imperfect union. The righteous ones marching, the righteous marching ones who sang, "We shall not be moved because Black lives matter." This is for the unspeakable. And this is for the unspeakable. And this is for the unspeakable. This is for the unlimited, unstoppable ones, the dreamers and doers who swim across the big sea of our imagination and show us the majestic shores of the Promised Land. The Wilma Rudolphs, the Muhammad Alis, the Althea Gibsons, the Jesse Owens, the Jordans and the LeBrons, the Serenas and the Cheryls, the Reese Whitleys, and the undiscovered. This is for the unbelievable, the weak, real cool ones. And this is for the unbending, the black as the night is beautiful ones. This is for the underdogs and the uncertain, the unspoken but no longer untitled. This is for the undefeated, and this is for you, and you, and you, and you. This is for us. Thank you.
At this time, the children and their parents have the choice of staying here in the sanctuary or going to our children's room, which is through the door to my right-hand side there, down the hall, where we have a child care worker there, and various child-centered equipment and activities.
So I want to offer a prayer, after which we'll go into a time of silence where we can reflect on both the words and the sentiment, but also whatever dears you hold close to you, whatever prayers of your own heart that you need. After the silence, we will sing together the meditation hymn, Voice Still and Small. These words come from Langston Hughes. Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken-winged bird that cannot fly. Hold fast to dreams, for when dreams go, life is a barren field, frozen with snow. So today's reading is a selection of a much longer poem by Pauli Murray, who's the subject of my sermon today. The poem is called Dark Testament, and she, soon after the book came out, which was somewhat later in her life, she was on a radio show, I think, and the announcer announced her as a lawyer turned poet, and Murray stopped him. Says, always a poet first. Beverly, I'm sure you appreciate that. Yes, poet first and then a lawyer. Always the poet first. Freedom is a dream, haunting an amber wine, or worlds remembered out of time. Not Eden's gate, but freedom lures us down a trail of skulls where men forever crush the dreamers, never the dream. I was an Israelite walking a sea bottom. I was a Negro slave following the North Star. I was an immigrant huddled in the ship's belly. I was a Mormon searching for a temple. I was a refugee clogging roads to nowhere. Always the dream was the same. Always the dream was freedom. Hope is a crushed stalk between clenched fingers. Hope is a bird's wing broken by a stone. Hope is a word in a tuneless ditty, a word whispered with the wind, a dream of 40 acres and a mule, a cabin of one's own and a moment to rest, a name and place for one's children and children's children at last. Hope is a song in a weary throat. Thank you, Dwayne. That was beautiful. For some reason, as I was reading and thinking about Pauli Murray, El Condor Pasa kept coming into my mind. Just seemed like it spoke of her and her life, a song of resistance. She would certainly rather be a hammer than a nail. And she certainly wanted to feel the earth beneath her feet. So, we are living in uncertain times. Or perhaps I should rephrase. There is a certainty right now of confusion and pain. And it can be overwhelming. Just overwhelming. At least that's how I've been feeling. Just overwhelmed. But then I remember that the present, this now, will become the past. The future is always ahead of us, and it is not yet written. So what shall we do? An answer to that question, I want to share with you today. As an answer to that question, I want to share with you today a bit of the life and wisdom of the Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray, an extraordinary person, someone you may have never heard of, but whose name I hope will remain on your lips for the rest of your days. Murray spent a lifetime struggling to bring light into the darkest corners of our world, to bring dignity to an undignified society, to batter down the barriers to human life and happiness erected all around. Across that lifetime, Murray knew one universal truth: the fundamental equality of all humans. For Murray, as an Episcopalian, this truth came from Jesus' commandment that we love one another. For us as UUs, this truth is the heart of our covenant. Still, as Murray preached, it is easy to, quote, pour out love upon those who love and cherish us. But, oh, it is so much harder to do so with, quote, those who dislike us, who even hate and despise us, or who try to hurt us. It is difficult to be gentle with those who are unkind, who say and do harmful things about us and to us. Yet the hard truth is that this is the only way. For when we respond with resentment and retaliation, the greatest damage is not what we do to others, but what we do to ourselves. But Murray would have been the first to tell you that knowing a truth and living that truth are two wholly different things. Life is messy. People are messy. Pain is real. Sorrow is real. As I quoted from Murray in the reading, hope is a crushed stalk between clenched fingers. Hope is a bird's wing broken by a stone. Hope is a song in a weary throat. But that hope is nourished by a dream. Always the dream was the same. Always the dream was freedom. So let me step back now and introduce you to this amazing human being. And afterward, if you want to learn more, there's an amazing documentary about Pauli Murray's life called My Name is Pauli Murray, and you can find it streaming, and it's just spectacular. You will feel better for knowing her life. But bear with me. Bear in mind that Murray's life was so full and complex that my time today cannot do it justice. Murray was born, Anne Pauline Murray, in 1910 in Baltimore, Maryland. But when she was 4, her mother died, and she went to live with her aunt in Durham, North Carolina. From the beginning, it was clear that Murray felt confined by life as a girl and wanted to walk a different path. Murray's Aunt Pauline used to refer to her beloved niece as, quote, my boy girl, and accepted her as she was, even as she knew the struggles Murray experienced throughout life. Murray did not have the language at the time, or even throughout her life, but today, Murray would likely have identified as trans. She privately referred to herself as queer and in between, but also as a woman. When Murray turned 16 and headed to New York for college, she changed her name to Pauli to reflect that in-betweenness. Indeed, it was that sense of having many identities that led Murray to pursue a life of radical transformation. As the theologian Gary Dorian explains, Murray variously discerned that being black and white, female, socialist, queer, and Episcopalian marginalized her. But unwilling to accept second-class status or to live quietly, Murray demanded change. That insistent demand made Murray a first in many places and institutions. Murray did not want to be a part of this caste of what she called the lonely firsts, but she refused to accept the world as it was, and so she was first. Murray was the first woman to attend and graduate from Howard Law School, the first black woman to receive a Juris Doctorate from Yale University, and the first black woman to be ordained as an Episcopalian minister. In 1940, 15 years before Rosa Parks and the Montgomery bus boycott, Murray and her friend Adeline McBean were arrested after they refused to move to the back of a Greyhound bus when it entered Virginia. In 1943 and 44, she led sit-ins at segregated lunch counters in Washington, D.C. I should say, successful sit-ins. In both cases, the luncheonettes changed their policies. In 1944, for her senior thesis at Howard, she wrote one of the most trenchant critiques of the separate but equal doctrine that came out of Plessy versus Ferguson. She wrote this in the early 1940s, a text that would influence the direction of Thurgood Marshall's argument in Brown versus Board of Education. When she first posited this idea that in fact there could be no meaningful equality, no true equality, while separate but equal existed, her classmates at Howard, her professors at Howard, kind of laughed her off. Said that will set us back, that cannot happen, we will not be able to make it happen. And she bet her professor $10 that it would happen within 20 years. Happened within 10. In 1961, she developed the legal strategy of applying the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment to questions of gender. That argument that Ruth Bader Ginsburg would successfully argue before the Supreme Court in 1971. In 1966, she was one of the co-founders of NOW, the National Organization of Women. The list is almost endless. One of the things that I love most about Pauli Murray is how she grew and transformed, even as the core of her being remained committed to universal truths. I want to offer 2 episodes, kind of bookends from her life, although it is hard to kind of say bookends because her life is like a bookshelf. So many bookends for there to be. But these are 2 moments early in her life when she was first finding her voice as an activist, and then later in the late 1960s when a new wave of activism was emerging across American campuses, and she found herself oddly, unhappily, somehow on the other side. She couldn't believe it. But it helped her to change once again, to reconnect and recommit to her truths. So in 1938, Franklin Delano Roosevelt gave a speech at the University of North Carolina where he was being awarded an honorary doctorate. And despite being a segregated institution in a segregated state, Roosevelt concluded his speech, "I am happy and proud to become an alumnus of the University of North Carolina," typifying, as it does, American liberal thought and American tradition. Murray would have none of it. She was incensed, and she wrote a heated letter to Roosevelt the next day. I want to quote from the letter extensively because it gives you a sense of Murray's righteous anger, but also her deep and abiding belief in democracy and the rights of all people to live without suffering. 12 million of your citizens have to endure insults, injustices, and such degradation of the spirit that you would believe impossible. The un-Christian, un-American conditions in the South make it impossible for me and other young Negroes to live there and continue our faith in the ideals of democracy and Christianity. We are as much political refugees from the South as any of the Jews in Germany. We cannot endure these conditions. Yesterday, you placed your approval on the University of North Carolina as an institution of liberal thought. You spoke of the necessity of change in a body of law to meet the problems of an accelerated era of civilization. You called on Americans to support the liberal philosophy, a liberal philosophy based on democracy. Well, what does that mean for Negro Americans? Does it mean that we at last may participate freely and on the basis of equality with our fellow citizens in working out the problems of democracy? Does it mean that the University of North Carolina is ready to open its doors to Negro students seeking enlightenment on the social and economic problems which the South faces? Does it mean that as an alumnus of the University of North Carolina, you are ready to use your prestige and influence to see to it that this step is taken towards greater opportunity for mutual understanding of race relations in the South? Or does it mean that everything you said has no meaning for us as Negroes, that again, we are to be set aside and passed over for more important problems? Murray worried that her letter would not reach the president's desk. So she sent a copy to Eleanor Roosevelt, in whom she had more faith, hoping that she would bring it to the president's attention. Still, she was surprised when 2 weeks later she received a personal letter back from Mrs. Roosevelt. It advocated a go-slow approach that Murray refused to accept. Mrs. Roosevelt's admonition not to, quote, push too hard naturally did not ease my impatience, she wrote, but her graciousness in taking the time to reply impressed me. I was also encouraged by her recent symbolic protest against segregation at the inaugurating meeting of the Southern Conference of Human Welfare in Birmingham, Alabama. Faced with a local ordinance requiring separate seating of the delegates, which was enforced by the local police, Mrs. Roosevelt had moved her chair to the center aisle, midway between the white and colored sections. In that atmosphere, it was an act of no mean courage on the part of the First Lady. It moved the Afro-American, a Negro Weekly, to comment, "If the people of the South do not grasp this gesture, we must. Sometimes actions speak louder than words." And thus began a decades-long friendship, one in which Murray could allow the heat of her passion to burn freely, perhaps because Eleanor always offered a cooling embrace. Their friendship, however, faced no greater test than an exchange they had in the summer of 1942. President Roosevelt had just issued Executive Order 9066, which authored the forced removal and internment of Japanese Americans, and it revealed to Murray the fundamental contradictions of America's claim to represent democracy in the war against the Axis. If there was ever a time for the president to use his emergency powers, it was to establish guarantees of civil rights and to overthrow the white supremacy of the South. Murray argued this time was now. Instead, he was using executive orders to, quote, rationalize discrimination. And as I was rereading Murray's autobiography, she talked about this and other executive orders, and I couldn't help but think about where we are today. Eleanor Roosevelt responded with shock at Murray's tone and claims. She wrote, "For one who must really have a knowledge of the workings of our kind of government, your letter seems to me one of the most thoughtless I have ever read. It is very easy for us as individuals to think what we would do if we were in office, but we forget with the election to the office of president go at the same time infinite restrictions and the kind of responsibility which is never ours as private citizens." Perhaps not surprisingly, the First Lady's response did not calm Murray, who saw in it just more fuel for her fire. Murray needed Mrs. Roosevelt to understand not just her ideas, but their source. In a reply, Murray candidly admitted, "I do not deny that my letter to President Roosevelt seems thoughtless, even reckless. Certainly, it was not intended to offer any fundamental solution to a major problem. But this is what Murray needed Eleanor Roosevelt to understand. Murray had written from, quote, a depth of despair, of desperation and disgust, such as every thinking Negro often experiences. Desperation in that there must be some way of bringing home to the American people our utterly untenable position of fighting in democracy's name for supremacy over the Axis powers, while 13 million of our own citizens are victims of a racial theory as vicious as Hitler's. Murray had sought Roosevelt out as an ally, but this letter seemed to be pushing them apart. It was at that moment that they realized that they needed to see one another, to be in each other's presence. This was not an intellectual debate they were having. Their work was the work of love and compassion, of a commitment to justice. And if they could not embrace one another despite their differences, and misunderstandings, their work would crumble. Murray understood that she did not have to change herself. She did not have to give up her commitments, but she could also not go it alone. 2 decades later, Murray found herself on the other side of the debate, or at least the other side of a debate, a major one around her. Not long after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., Murray was offered a professorship at Brandeis University, where she taught the history of law, U.S. history, and what at times was called Afro-American studies. This represented a culmination of her professional career, an achievement that had seemed to slip from her grasp year after year. Each step forward seemed to bring a step back. And to really kind of look at Murray across their life and to see that Murray had letters of recommendation from Eleanor Roosevelt, from the head of major institutions and universities, from future Supreme Court justices as part of her portfolio. But somehow she was just a little too to the left. Somehow she was just a little too feisty. Somehow she just couldn't be quiet. And she suffered from it year after year after year. She lived at different times in great poverty, living by hook or by crook, taking jobs where she could get them, although always, always connected to the search for justice. And so this was amazing. This was everything that she had wanted. Murray described her time at Brandeis as, quote, the most exciting, tormenting, satisfying, embattled, frustrated, and at times triumphant period of my secular life. Murray understood that she had been hired to bring Black studies to Brandeis, but she understood this in a way that she soon realized her students did not. She explained, to have a part in the effort of reintegrating our national heritage, of making whole the American psyche, of bringing into the intellectual currents of our past the significant tributaries of, quote, the Black experience, was a creative mission of high order, and one that in its potential for reconciliation had religious as well as political and social implications. In my idealism, however, I had overlooked the crucial factor of living experience. While I shared the onerous burdens of inequality of status with all people of color, in the case of Negro students at Brandeis, I brought to my teaching position the outlook of one who had lived through a preceding historical period, extending 40 years before they were born, and which they either knew little about or embraced only in theory. Those 40 years of intense personal history separated me from the young Black students and gave me a somewhat different perspective on the ubiquitous racial dilemma which now tore at their vitals. As she would write in her autobiography, from the moment I arrived on campus, I was thrown into fundamental philosophical and moral conflict with the advocates of a Black ideology as alien to my nature and as difficult for me to accept as white ethnocentrism. This emerging racial rhetoric smacked of an ethnic party line and made absolutely no sense to me. In turn, some of my most deeply held values about universal human dignity were considered obsolete by young Black radicals. And so far from providing leadership in a new and constructive place of civil rights, I found myself in a head-on collision with those whom I had wanted to serve. I think hopefully you can kind of see a little of the echo of her switching places with Eleanor Roosevelt. This became clear, her difficult, perhaps somewhat tenuous position, on her first day of teaching. I was outlining the content of the course when a young man interrupted me with the question, "Why do you keep saying Negroes when you're talking about black people. As Murray recalled, I was born during the era when colored was the prevalent usage, along with the ignominious lowercase Negro, which I passionately hated, because the absence of capitalization conveyed the status of a thing and not a person. During my college days in the 1930s, I routinely went through my textbooks with a fountain pen to change the small n to a capital N wherever I encountered the term Negro. My generation of activists was part of a long struggle to elevate the designation to its capitalized form so that Negro became a mark of dignity and respect. For her, black seemed to cede the ground that she and others had fought so hard for. But she knew that she needed to think about this. She needed to work on this. She needed to understand. She wrote in her journal, "Why can't I be proud of these kids for what they've done?" She began to reconsider her position, not in relation to the term Negro, which she continued to prefer throughout her entire life, but for the black radical movements that had understood that had taken forward a piece of her lifelong project of liberation. Murray's friend, Mary Norris, a white feminist at Brandeis, suggested that maybe Murray needed to think about this in a different way, that in thinking about black militancy at Brandeis, she tries substituting the words women or women's liberation for black and black liberation. The women's movement had plenty of angry separatist voices, she realized, but she sympathized with them, cheered them on, and did not feel diminished by them. Murray would later reflect, "I began to see that much of my barely disguised hostility towards the Black Revolution was in reality my feminist resentment at the crude sexism I perceived in many of the male leaders of that movement." Much as she had with Eleanor Roosevelt more than 30 years earlier, Murray understood that she could be herself, but also could be, had to be compassionate. The work of Black Revolution had also been her lifelong work. So too, however, the work of women's revolution and the very revolution of human dignity. To be able to be so deeply connected to what you know to be true, and yet also able to take in and reconsider ideas so central to your life, where those counter that most essential truth, I think is the great lesson of Murray's life, and a great lesson for us in these times. Let me end with words from Murray's poem, Dark Testament, which I used in the reading. "I am an Israelite walking a sea bottom. I am a Negro slave following the North Star. I am an immigrant huddled in the ship's belly. I am a Mormon searching for a temple. I am a refugee clogging roads to nowhere. Always the dream was the same. Always the dream is the same. Always the dream is freedom." Murray believed with all their heart and soul that true freedom, the liberation of the oppressed, and the equality of all people was the dream that mattered, was the only dream that mattered. And so even in these dark times, let us remember that those who have carried forward the dream of freedom, let us remember those, and let us hitch ourselves to that great train of humanity. So may it be. Amen.
Generosity is a spiritual discipline. We can now practice our active giving either by placing your offering in the collection plate or by using the information in your order of service to give electronically. And there are QR codes in the back, one of which is for this week's announcements, and the other is for the giving platform. Thank you, Dwayne and the choir, for that great song. And thank you, Justin, for a very enlightening presentation about a liberating leader. Gifts to this community of faith are gratefully received. Let us acknowledge these gifts by reading together the words in your order of service. This gift from the abundance of my life blesses me, our ministries, and the world. Giving in the offering plate and pledging are part of how we steward this congregation. There are countless other ways to serve, build community, and share our love with the rest of the city. Here are a few opportunities coming up. One thing with regard to the choir is Dwayne, our music director, would like everyone to know that if you enjoy singing and giving the gift of song to this congregation, then let him know that you're interested in the choir. And the choir practices from 9 to 10 every Sunday morning before the service. And so currently, that's just a 1-hour commitment when you're coming to church on that day anyway. So for busy people, it makes it even more available. We also have a spotlight announcement from Barrett.
Hi, everybody. It's time for Crew of Kids for Change. Woo! do. So for those who don't know, the Religious Exploration Team every year does a little fundraiser for a local organization that the young people choose. Normally we have a float and we go around and it's like fun and carnival. We don't have a float this year because there's a lot going on. But we are selling king cake at coffee hour, and if anybody has spare change in the next 3 weeks before Mardi Gras, dig it out of your couches, your little bowls in your house, bring it to church, drop it in our little jar. We're going to be raising money for a climate justice organization. The young people will be voting on it when we do our annual change counting party. So also, if you have an organization you want to pitch to us, we have a few that we're already considering, including the Descendants Project, who has been here with us before. You can email me, or you can join us for our change counting party and tell the young people about the organization you have in mind. So we're really excited to be doing this and involving the congregation, and I'm really excited because I haven't had enough king cake yet. So I hope you feel the same way, and we'll buy some king cake. We'll take cash and Venmo during coffee hour in the hall. And bring your change next week.
And today, after the service and after coffee hour, we will have our quarterly congregational meeting, and we strongly encourage everyone to attend. We have a congregation driven by the democracy of its members, and so we are run by the input and energy of all of us, and this is our opportunity to express that and to make decisions about the future of our church family. So now we will stand for our chalice extinguishing, which is also in the order of service. So let us read together. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Our closing hymn is number 1035, Freedom is Coming, which is in the turquoise teal hymnal soft cover.
The choir's going to sing it through twice, and you need to join us.
I didn't hear that.
The choir's going to sing it twice, and then you join us. Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom, freedom is coming. Oh, freedom, oh, freedom, oh, freedom, freedom is coming.
For our benediction, if I can find my piece of paper. Am I correct? I haven't skipped. Yes. Sorry. Our benediction is taken from Laura Lynn Bellamy. If here you have found freedom, Take it with you into the world. If here you have found comfort, go and share it with others. If you have dreamed dreams, help one another that they may come true. If you have known love, give some back to a bruised and hurting world. Go in peace, my friends. Please turn and greet your neighbors.